Hello, welcome back to the channel. So Friday I did a video. Some of you may still be watching it. It was a little too long, and trust me, I edited it down a lot. Just talking about garden tools and what the best garden tool is. I don't think there's such a thing, but I'm not going to go back into that now. If you want, go back and watch that video. If you can, give it a thumbs up, or even just turn around and hit mute and just let the whole thing play through. It helps the YouTube algorithms when you do that, you know, actually watching the whole thing through. So anyways, today I'm going to be talking about plant labels. Yes, I know that's kind of a dull thing, but I've been struggling for years on labeling my plants with a label that I'm happy with. And maybe some of you have the same problem. Maybe some of you, especially more experienced gardeners who may be watching this channel, have found those answers and those solutions. So like many gardeners, I've started off with plastic labels of various types and sizes. I mean, I've gone through so many different types of labels. I mean, I've used this, and I think this. And recently I've sort of settled on a label made by a German company. I stumbled across it on Amazon. I think it might have been in somebody else's video or in a magazine or someplace. I found it someplace on the interwebs, but I stumbled across it. So I bought a pack of 25 labels off of Amazon. I gave it a try, and at first I was using first, before I get into all that, let me go back and talk about some of the labels I have used. So I've used, like I said, plastic labels, small, thin plastic labels. Those were my initial labels that I used to label a seed tray, for instance. And they were okay, and I was writing on them with a couple of different types of permanent markers. I had eventually settled on one. I believe it's made by Staedtler. Staedtler, is that how you pronounce it? I'm not sure. Either way, post a picture and a link here maybe. And it worked for me, and it all was well. But, you know, if I needed to put a marker in her bed, or maybe put something out in the garden that, you know, again, I wanted to see from a distance, and I'm getting older, my eyes are getting a little worse, I bought bigger labels, and those work for me too, to an extent. Again, they're basically temporary labels, not too thrilled with them, not super happy, but they kind of work. I still use them in the garden today, and then I try to reuse them every single year as long as the label will last. Again, they're made out of plastic. The heat and the UV light eventually makes them fragile and they break or whatever, or I can't scrape the name off of it anymore. I use a piece of steel wool too, and I take the steel wool and I rub it on the face of the label, and that usually takes off most, if not all, of the ink, which is great. And then I can reuse it and rewrite it. I've tried using fancier labels. So I bought these when I first moved down here. I tried using these copper labels, and the copper labels, they come from various manufacturers, and some of them use a cheaper metal. The copper doesn't wrap all the way around the top of the holder, so sometimes they fall off, or they turn around and start bending off due to reasons. And then you cut yourself. I've cut myself on these numerous times. Not really thrilled about that. And when they're not made out of stainless steel, they tend on rusting quite a bit. And then they get a little hard to pull out of the ground. Of course, the metal is breaking down. It's rusting, which is fine. It doesn't really hurt anything. It's annoying. And again, they start getting hard to read. What I did was I tried writing on them with permanent marker, and I couldn't see it. It didn't look good. The label is a little small. My handwriting is not that good. So I was using P-Touch labels. And at first it was a great thing. The copper behind the P-Touch label wound up staying bright and shiny, whereas the rest of it dulled. Two problems. One, the copper sort of blends in with the whole garden environment, and then I can't, again, eyes getting older, I have a hard time finding the label. And then when I do find the label, it's sometimes hard to read the label itself, again, because of the font size perhaps, or even if some of the corrosion has gotten behind the label, it just makes it harder. Some of you out there may have turned around and done things like this, and I still do this, especially in a temporary setting. So if I purchased a plant at a garden center, I'll turn around, just take the temporary tag, the plant tag that comes with, and I'll stick that in the ground, at least temporarily, until I know the plant is established and will survive. Then I may put on a more permanent decorative tag. So this year I've stumbled across a couple of different types of labels, which I'm happy with, and I'm going to be using going forward until I perhaps find something better. So the first one is actually a plastic label. It's just a regular, it's a 6-inch plastic label, nothing too dramatic or fancy. Some of you may already be using this type of label. I will leave the manufacturer below or over here. Plastic is semi-textured. I can write on it with a pencil easily and it stays, which is fantastic, which then means I can take an eraser and just erase that instead of having to scrub with steel wool. It's so much easier. And now again, because it has that texture, it should hold up to the rain, the water. The labels that I've had out in the garden here, again temporary, that I'm using in various pots or maybe out in the flower beds or something, they seem to be holding up. Now the other type of label that I've used, or I just started using recently, as I mentioned earlier in the video, is a black label. So this label I found over on Amazon, and I've been using this throughout the garden, and it came with a white paint marker, which is great. I, as you can see, hand wrote. And then I thought, well, I have a filmmaker, why don't I just try putting some labels on it and see how that does? So I've done that to a few of the labels throughout the garden. But then I was thinking, wait a minute, I don't really like the look of this with this label on, even though it's clear and easy to read, especially from a distance. It just doesn't look aesthetically pleasing. So I've recently went and I purchased some knockoff brand labels that are relatively inexpensive, and I've loaded it into my label maker. I'll show you that in a second. And I turn around and printed off some labels, and I think now they look a lot better. It's a lot crisper, it looks cleaner, it looks more aesthetically pleasing. It's easier for me to read. So again, especially from a little, bit of a distance. Now, why do I label plants? And maybe you label your plants, maybe you don't. But I label my plants out in the garden so I can easily identify them. So I can start, if I see the label all the time, and if I see the name of the plant associated with the plant itself, slowly but surely in my own little brain, it will start to turn around. And when I see a plant that is, for instance, let's say Gaura. Gaura is easy to identify though, but Gaura, if I see Gaura somewhere else without a label, I can go, oh, that's Gaura or a variant thereof. If I see Salvia, again, I'm learning, what Salvia looks like, the characteristics of Salvia, not just by, seeing it in a book, but actually planting them up, seeing how they grow, and having that label right in front so I can look at it and go, that's a Salvia, and that's the variety of Salvia. Which is also good because down the line, especially once I start losing my mind a little bit more, I'll be able to go, oh yeah, that's right, I planted this red salvia here, and I planted a blue salvia here, and I planted this pink snapdragon here, and a white snapdragon there, because I may only remember that I planted a snapdragon, but not what type of snapdragon. And if and when the time comes where I actually start caring about color combinations or design aesthetics in my garden, then it'll be sort of important to know what I planted where and what color combos go where, etc. That kind of thing. Anyways, I'm prattling and babbling. It's what I do. Let me show you how I make the new tags now. Okay, the company, by the way, is called Gartenfurt. Again, I'll try to remember to leave a link in the description below, or I will leave a picture of it up on the screen. So I fire up my label maker here, and the label I'm going to replace is this one, Husker Penstemon. As you can see, it's looking a little on the rough side. And the copper, like you can see right there, where it seems to be poking up. And this is kind of like an edge I would cut myself on. So I'm going to replace this label with something that hopefully will look a lot better. So I'm going to choose to go pretty big on this font. So we're going to use 24 point. Okay, that looks right. Hit print. Okay, I got my label. This is the way that the label itself comes. They offer all stainless steel or galvanized appearance, and also a copper, if I'm not mistaken. But there's a protective label on here. So we peel that off, and then I can turn around and place the P-Touch label on. So the label itself is clear, the text is white. I press it on as firmly as I can, pushing out as much air bubbles as I can. Also try to be careful not to get any dust or dirt onto the label itself. That will stick underneath the label. And there we go. You tell me which one looks better. So there we go. my new label with easy to read white text on it. I think it is. It may not show up that clearly on the camera. And I'll put it out in the garden where the penstemon is. And now I know, well, I have always known that I had a penstemon there. I just didn't necessarily know the variety or couldn't remember the variety. Now I know it's a Husker penstemon. I am growing one other type of variety of penstemon this year, which is not a Husker, which hopefully I'll be planting out probably June-ish into the garden. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Click that bell icon to be notified when I do post up a new video, because maybe I'll be planting out that penstemon and I'll tell you what penstemon that is. If you use labels in your garden, please leave comments below, maybe a link as to what label you use, what type of label. I've even tried using the slate labels. They're nice little rectangular pieces of slate. I use them in the rose garden, and my biggest problem with those is the paint. Maybe it's the paint marker that comes with it, but the paint seems to fade off of the slate label over time. So I'm not really thrilled with that. I do like the look of the slate label, but again, if the paint is going to be fading off and I have to reapply it every 3 to 6 months, it's not really kosher to me. It's not something I want to be doing, along with all the other maintenance that I have to do in the garden. It's not the end of the world if I have to, but again, I don't think that's the slate label is something that I'll be moving forward with. So anyways, maybe you guys have some good suggestions, and maybe I won't be using this in the future. Maybe I'll be using something else better. This is not the end all be all. This is just what over time my labels have evolved to. In a perfect world, I would turn around and get those like nice plastic black and white ones that you see at Arboretum or a garden someplace where they use to identify plants. You know, the little plaques that they would use where they can put down not only the common name but also the Latin name, things like that. I would use those, but that's a lot of money, so that's probably not going to happen. So again, any suggestions on labels, please leave them below. Any comments, etc., please let me know. I do appreciate hearing from all of you guys. And that's going to wrap it up for today. I'm going to catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.